Right, so we're starting off this, for the whole duration of this boat trip will be in Bristol's floating harbour. It's part of the River Avon that we're floating down now. Bristol Harbour used to be a huge industrial port. It's the reason why Bristol is as affluent as it is, and why it was built up so much is because of its trade. You know, since the 12th century, this has been a bustling port. In the 1970s, they decided that merchant shipping had got too big. You got million-ton cargo ships now that you just can't fit in Bristol's docks. So they decided to close it for commercial shipping. There were many ideas on what they were going to do next. One idea was they were going to fill the whole thing in with concrete and put a motorway through the middle. Glad they didn't do that, I'd be out of a job. But instead they decided to redevelop much of the docks into what we see today. Over on the right there, there's this red building. In there's a place called New Cut Coffee. They make really good coffee. I got a discount this morning, so I promised that I'd mention them. So go there if you want. You probably noticed this pirate-looking ship on our right here. I'll not mention that now. I won't go in depth about that now. I'll leave you in a little bit of suspense. I'll mention it on the way back. Instead, I'll talk about the building behind it, the M shed. So the facade of this building looks like how it would have before 1970s. So it's a transit ship with the cranes, the electric cranes, still outside there. Obviously labelled 29 to 32 can show you how much of the harbour side has been redeveloped. There used to be 56 of these cranes along the harbour side. You can see they've got a really nice fresh new coat of paint. There's a very interesting fact there. Those black pieces of paint that you can see are actually anti-climbing paint, because lots of people tend to, when they're drunk, try and climb up the cranes. There was a man quite recently at 4 AM doing pull-ups from the top of one of those cranes, so they're deciding to try and mitigate that as much as possible with some anti-climbing paint. And now we're coming up to Prince Street Bridge ahead of us, the oldest swing bridge in Bristol's harbour. So this was made in 1879, and it works on a water hydraulic system that pushes the boat up and then swings it open away from us. We won't need the bridge to swing for us today. Our boat is just small enough that we can fit under. It's quite a tight fit though. But our skipper Steve will have to duck. I didn't hear a splash, so I think he's probably alright. Over here on the right we have the area of Redcliffe. This used to be a separate town to Bristol, but as Bristol expanded it got swallowed up and just became a part of Bristol. This is where all the wealthy merchants used to live. The taxes were a little bit cheaper in Redcliffe, so they all decided to live there. These cliffs here, this cliff face, is the Red Cliff that it's named after. Not really very red, but there's a honeycomb network of caves that actually run underneath there. These merchants loved money so much they decided to sell the ground beneath their feet. And for Bristol Open Doors, they are in fact doing walking tours of the cave right now. You can see there where that sign is, there's a doorway that leads into the caves. Sometimes they put on scary movies there as well at Halloween. So with all that money, the wealthy merchants of Redcliffe decided to build this church here, St Mary Redcliffe Parish Church. To our right you can see the steeple there. It was Bristol's tallest building until very recently. Got beaten by a new residential structure that's been built. Queen Elizabeth I once visited St Mary Redcliffe Parish Church and described it as the fairest and goodliest church in all of Christendom. I mean, that's very nice, but when she came to Bristol she also described it as having some of the ugliest people she'd ever seen. Bit rude. So we've now entered a part of the harbour called the Backs. We've got Redcliffe Back over to our right and then Welsh Back over to our left. The reason they're called the Backs is because these would have been the backs of the warehouses that were built next to the river. And so boats could come in and load cargo right out of the warehouse onto their boats, and off their boats into the warehouses. And then Welsh Back on our left was used mainly by the Welsh to trade in wool. And then in the 12th and 13th century, apparently they also used to sell their own children into slavery. On the left here we have the apple, which is a cider bar. It's got over 39 varieties of cider, all very good. I wouldn't recommend drinking them all at once though. And just between the two barges here you'll get a small glimpse at King Street. It's got lots of old historic pubs on it, and also has our Theatre Royal, the Bristol Old Vic. And that is in fact the longest licensed, continually running English-speaking theatre in the world. So this is as far as we're going to go in this direction. We're going to start making our turn now. But it gives us a really great look at Bristol Bridge here, which is very important. This is where the settlement of Bristol began and where it gets its name from. So the Anglo-Saxons tried to flee the Vikings up the River Avon, and they came to here, and on the embankment just to the left they began the settlement that would become Bristol. They built a bridge out of wood, and so there's been a bridge there for thousands of years now. That's the fourth Bristol Bridge, built in 1768 by a man named James Bridges. Really born into his craft, I think. And then obviously we've made some adjustments to it over time for cars and stuff like that. So the Anglo-Saxons, when they made that settlement, they called it Brigstow, which means place of the bridge. And then over time, the West Country accent sort of melded that word into Bristol. So Bristol was quite heavily bombed during the Bristol Blitz in World War II. Just over 919 tons of bombs were dropped on the city, completely destroying the city centre. When they were bombing around the docks, only one bomb managed to hit the dockside. That's over to our right here, where this pontoon is now. A lot of the sailors around Bristol call it the bomb hole. So you can see the weird sort of shape there. They just sort of decided to run with it and build that pontoon there. So as I mentioned before, the Welsh traders would sell their children to slavery over here on the right in the 12th and 13th century. That's just a part of Bristol's long-running relationship with the slave trade. It's a part of Bristol's history that we're only really reckoning with now. In the 17th and 18th century, over 800,000 Africans were brought from Africa to here to be sold on in America and the Caribbean in absolutely terrible conditions. Most of them died on the way over on the boats. So we're reckoning that with that now as a city. The statue of Edward Colston is a great example of that. On June the 7th last year, during a Black Lives Matter protest, this statue of Edward Colston, a merchant from Bristol who traded heavily in the slave trade. He shipped over 80,000 slaves, 19,000 of which died in transit. He made most of his money that way. So there's a statue of him in our town centre, and it was pulled down, rolled along the docks, and then dropped into the river. That statue is now on display at the Shed Museum if you want to go and see it. It's a very interesting exhibition. Really goes a lot more in depth than I can about Bristol's long history with slavery and its connections with institutions that are even still running now. Over on the right here we've got this black and grey barge called the Thekla. This is a boat turned into a nightclub. It's very popular among the youngsters of Bristol. The interesting thing about this, there used to be a Banksy painted on the side there. One night he came over and painted a rower on the side of the Thekla. You can see it's not there anymore. In the morning the harbour masters came along and they thought someone had vandalised the Thekla, so they got their black paint out and started painting over it. So you can see this amphitheatre up ahead of us with all of these, just to the right now, with all of these tents and such set up. That is actually, in the 70s, you know, when redevelopment started, that was one of the first buildings built. It's the Lloyds Banking Group European headquarters. And then, as a sign of goodwill, they gave the amphitheatre outside back to the city of Bristol. And often you'll see events like that being there, or film crews often stay there as well. We've got the Lord Nelson on our left here. We've also got the Flower of Bristol suddenly cutting through. Doing more wave. That is the STS Lord Nelson, so it's a sailing training ship. It's actually fully accessible by wheelchair, one of the only boats in the world. You can go all the way up the rigging in a wheelchair. And then on the left, finally we have the Matthew. So that boat was built in 1997 to mark the 500th anniversary of the boat that it's replicating's first journey. So that boat was captained by a man named Giovanni Cabottio, who's a Venetian sailor who was trying to find a new route to Asia by going west instead of east. So he came to Bristol, because Bristol had some of the greatest sailors in the world, still does. And when he got here he realised that the Bristolians couldn't say his name, so he changed his name to John Cabot. Didn't manage to find a western trade route to Asia. He ran into a little patch of land called Canada. But that did make him one of the first documented Europeans to set foot in what he called the New World. Obviously we now know many Vikings went before him and many other people, and there were people already living there.
ये वाला नहीं हुआ। हाँ। क्या? ये जो बर्गर
with Bristol Harbour closing as an industrial port, you had all of these spaces for residential moorings opening up. So all these boats on the left and right of us are houseboats. People live on these, lots of different kinds of boats, cabin cruisers and narrow boats. It's very, very expensive actually to get one of these moorings. There's about a 3-year wait list to get one. Some of these bigger boats, like the one on the left here, some of them are sectioned up into apartments, like 3 different apartments, and they can even have their own postcodes. So part of the redevelopment also meant some of these new developments, like this one on the right of us here, these sort of residential developments. This is on Sunday Times top 10 worst looking developments in the UK. I think it has something to do with the sort of Benidorm hotel vibe. I often forget how loud these microphones actually are, like so they could, I probably shouldn't say that. And then we got a much more successful development over here on the right. This used to be in the 1820s. This was Cannons Marsh Gas Works, so they'd use it to boil down whale blubber. So they'd hunt it, mix it with a bunch of chemicals, and then use it to fuel Bristol street lamps. So it was a sort of polluted mess for about 100 years, and then they decided to do it up to these lovely new apartments. Very expensive. The one with the circular window there went for £1.3 million. I think it has a little bit of something to do with the view that you can get of the suspension bridge over, not the suspension bridge, the Escape Grid over to our left. Designed by Isabel Kingdom Brunel. It currently sits in the Great Western Dry Dock where it was built in 1839. It's known as the world's first great ocean liner. It's the grandmother of modern day shipping. When it was built, it was the biggest ship in the world. It combined 2 new technologies of an iron-hulled ship and a screw propulsion engine for the first time. And when he designed it, people thought Brunel was mad, that he didn't know what he was doing, that it would never float or even sail. But it did, and it was very successful. It used to run out of London and take a very wealthy Victorian people to New York, and it could do that in just 14 days, which at the time was incredible. When it first turned up in New York, people thought it was a time machine. Over the last few years, water sports have become very popular in Bristol's harbour. You see on the left some sailors here sailing about. We try not to hit them, but sometimes it's unavoidable. Now is actually a very good time to tell you about, or explain to you a little bit about how the mechanics of Bristol's floating harbour actually works. So the level in the harbour doesn't change, the water level, whereas Bristol, like the River Avon, is hugely tidal. It's got one of the largest tidal ranges in the world, beaten only by the Bay of Fundy in Canada. It's a 12-metre range. And this was in the 17th century for a lot of merchants very annoying. Because you'd be trying to get cargo on and off ships. It was 6 miles inland, so the tide really had a lot. You had a lot riding on the tide. If you missed the tide, then you were sort of, you were screwed a little bit on that one. So this man named William Jessup decided enough was enough. So in 1805, he started working on making the harbour into a floating harbour where the tide wouldn't affect the water level inside the harbour. So he went about putting locks on each end of the harbour. About 10 miles behind us, past Bristol Bridge, there's a Netham Lock, and then just in front of us here, not where this blue ridge is, but just round to the right is Entrance Lock, which holds all the water in and lets you travel up and down between the Avon and the floating harbour. And then the tide, he had to do something about the tide of the River Avon because it would cause huge flooding if that was all he did. So he took 1,000 men and 5 years to dig a whole new river. So over to the left, this chunk of land here, it's only about 200 metres of it, and then on the other side of that is a river called the Cut, or the New Avon, that he built, and that's where the tide goes. So the tide is diverted around the city. And then the way they keep the water levels secure, just ahead of us is this place called the Under Fall Yard. It's called that because under the water there are these huge sluice gates that open and close and regulate the amount of water that's in the harbour. So as we turn here and head back in the other direction, we get a good view of the Under Fall Yard. They still build boats there, fix up boats, and also at the Harbour Master's office and HQ. They're sort of the harbour police. Don't really have any real powers, no powers of arrest or anything, but they like to just drive very fast around and look busy, look important. Mostly what they're doing is pulling people out of the water. You're not actually allowed to swim in Bristol's harbours. You can get a £1,000 fine for swimming. This is just extremely dangerous. The water quality is actually not that bad, you wouldn't get ill, it's just about the amount of boats they're driving around. And the depth of the water as well. If you ever do find yourself in the water for some reason, for any reason, along much of the key walls. You can see some behind those Bristol Channel social rowers boats there. There are chains hanging down just by the waterline. And so if you ever find yourself in the water, you can swim over to those chains and hold on and move along to where there might be a ladder.
करना है तो फिर
Over here on the right we have the newest and most successful water-based sport, paddleboarding. Bit of a spectator sport this, you know, waiting for one to fall off. Let's try and get some good waves in, see if we can get any of them before. Oh.
I am not standing up with the phone coming past.
आज वैसे वेदर जो था ना उधर भी जाने वाला था बीच पे भी अब तो नहीं जा सकते
Over here on the left we have a good view of these multicoloured houses up on this hill here. It's a staple of many sailing towns around the UK, but we're not really sure why they decided to paint the houses that colour. People have different theories. Some people think that Banksy might have come on in the middle of the night and just painted them. No one saw him. My favourite though is after the sailors came home from their journeys, the first thing they want to do after stepping off the boat is go to the pub and get smashed. And then after that, they would need some way to find their way home. So they just look up on the hillside, see the very colourful house that they painted, and get right home. So in a minute here we're going to be coming back past the SS Great Britain on the right. The SS Great Britain, after it was launched in 1843, did not work out of Bristol. It was too big for the dock. They could barely even get it out of the dock. But it worked many jobs over its life. As I said, it was a transport between London and New York. It was also took immigrants to Australia. It was used as coal storage. And also as a troop carrier for the Crimean War. After some time though, it was in quite a state of disrepair. Fire had broken out on one of the decks at some point, and it was not very salvageable at the boat. So they just left it in the Falkland Islands, and it sat there until 1970. The Navy were even taking pot shots at it for target practice. And then a group of philanthropists came together and they decided to put a lot of money into bringing it all the way from the Falkland Islands back to where it's made in Bristol in that Great Western Dry Dock. And it's now been restored to its state that it was when it launched. and has become a very successful, award-winning museum. It's brilliant. If you haven't been to the SS Great Britain, I highly suggest it. It's a really great museum. To give you a little taste of something you might find out in there, this painted line on the outside of the SS Great Britain, the white checked line, that's actually piracy prevention. So they couldn't afford to lose a whole deck of well-paying passengers to a bunch of cannons. So instead they decided to paint that white line and then paint black boxes in the middle, so that from far away, looking through a pirate's telescope, they just see a huge gunship. Incredibly, that actually worked, and it was never attacked by pirates.
You wait for me to fall in. I'm part of your holiday. One of the
आरिस बेल करना Hey, look at these guys, man.
Hey, look, we said the whole time, don't